Open the podcast bay door as hell.
Welcome to episode 52 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits. But I've found that people can sometimes feel left out or get overwhelmed because they don't already have what some consider the requisite knowledge to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. This week, I'm not going to be covering a question from a listener. I'm definitely still looking for questions though, so send them my way to welcometogeektown@gmail.com. Since this episode is number 52, I thought I'd take advantage of this to cover in more detail the weekly, year-long series that shares that name. I've mentioned the miniseries 52 in a few other episodes, but this time we'll dive in deep to see what the series is about and what made it so special. I'm not going to go into all of the twists and turns involved, but I will be spoiling some moments from later in the story, so be forewarned. Also, this story is an epic that involves many characters, some of whom I've given more complete histories of in the past. If you're a complete newbie to the DC universe, I'd recommend going back to some of my previous episodes before diving into the deep end here. Specifically, episodes 1, 15, 26, and 42 will be of particular help. Before we get into 52 itself, let's discuss the big event that preceded it so we can understand the status quo as we get into the series. That event was Infinite Crisis. Although it came out in late 2005 into 2006, it was as close as we've seen to a direct sequel to 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths, as characters last seen in that crossover reappeared, including the Earth 2 Superman and Lois Lane, Alexander Luthor of Earth 3, and the character who turned out to be the main villain of Infinite Crisis, Superboy of Earth Prime. Earth Prime in pre-Crisis days was ostensibly our Earth. Written by Geoff Johns, with art mostly by Phil Jimenez, with assists from Jerry Ordway, George Perez, and Ivan Reis near the end, this series ended with the creation of a new Earth, very similar to the post-Crisis Earth, but with some minor details changed. And the trinity of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, who I'll just refer to as the Trinity from here on, each needing to take time off from the superhero life. Wonder Woman and Batman both needed time to take journeys of self-discovery, while Superman's powers had been drained while fighting near a red sun and had no idea if or when his extraordinary abilities would return. Now, in order to keep publishing the adventures of those three, after Infinite Crisis ended, all of DC's main books moved their stories 1 year into the future, labeled on the covers as 1 year later. Many of the heroes had undergone some drastic change in the intervening time, and DC promised to cover that missing year in the weekly series simply titled 52, with each issue covering 1 week of in-universe time. This was not the first time that a comic title was released weekly. Action Comics was retitled to Action Comics Weekly for 42 issues back in 1988 into 1989, missing only 1 week of publication in that time. But there were some key differences in the logistics. Action Comics Weekly was an anthology book with multiple stories contained in each issue, many of which had been written in advance as fill-in stories for other titles. Whereas 52 was going to be one ongoing story, albeit following different characters, so if one artist wasn't finished on his section, they couldn't just substitute in a different story in that space. 52 was still partially an anthology, though, in a couple of ways. First of all, as I mentioned, the story followed several different characters, with their stories rarely interacting. Who those characters are, we'll get to in a bit. Secondly, in issues 2 through 11, we had a secondary story titled The History of the DC Universe, in which Donna Troy, aka the first Wonder Girl, through Harbinger's recording device — Harbinger is another character from the original Crisis on Infinite Earths — learns the overarching history of New Earth from the origin of the universe up through the present day. Then, in issues 12 through 51, backup stories were used to give the current origins of many of the DC heroes of New Earth. Even with these small backup stories, editor Stephen Wacker had a project on his hands that was going to be difficult to pull off, to say the least. To assist him with this, Wacker put together a superstar writing team of Grant Morrison, Jeff Johns, Mark Waid, and Greg Rucka, and got writer-artist Keith Giffen to do breakdowns on the book. Breakdowns, if you're unfamiliar, are incredibly loose drawings to give the penciler a basic idea of panel layouts on each page. Having one artist do breakdowns really helped give the book a consistent feel, even as multiple artists with varying styles came through and worked on pages throughout the series. In alphabetical order, the following artists all contributed pencils and/or inks: Eddie Barrows, Chris Batista, Joe Bennett, Dale Eaglesham, Keith Giffen, in addition to the breakdowns mentioned earlier, Jamal Eigel, Jack Jadson, Phil Jimenez, Rui Jose, Dan Jurgens, Justiniano, Ken Lashley, Mike McCone, Todd Knock, and Derek Robertson. Covers for all 52 issues were provided by J.G. Jones. So, what is 52 about? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it follows a few different stories starring characters from all over the DC universe. I don't want to get too far into spoilers, so I'll do my best to introduce each group and their basic conflict. Let's start with the most disconnected team. At the end of Infinite Crisis, Animal Man, Starfire, and Adam Strange ended up marooned on an alien planet devoid of intelligent life besides themselves. Over the year, the trio do what they need to get off the planet and back to Earth, dealing with cosmic-powered threats along the way, including Lobo and the Emerald Eye of Ekron, a near-omnipotent villain usually seen in the future timeline of the Legion of Superheroes. Fans of big cosmic tales will most enjoy this section of the book. Another story follows Ralph Dibny, aka the Elongated Man. Ralph's wife died in the miniseries called Identity Crisis, which caused much of the strife between the Trinity that kicked off Infinite Crisis. And early in 52, he finds out that his wife's grave had been vandalized with an upside-down S shield, the crest worn by Superman. Using his detective skills, Ralph follows this trail to a resurrection cult, which leads him down a dark, mystical path. If you like mysteries and/or mysticism, this is the portion you're likely to be most attracted to. Those first two stories stay fairly disconnected, but not entirely, from the others. But the remaining four get more tangled up together. In one section, The Question, a semi-paranoid street-level crime fighter, recruits Detective Renee Montoya in helping to stop a takeover of Gotham City by the organized crime syndicate known as Intergang. This storyline also introduces us to the post-crisis version of Kate Kane, aka Batwoman. You can hear more about her in episode 42. During their investigation, the pair end up traveling the world and also get involved in Black Adam's story. The Shazam villain has taken over the country of Kahndaq, first ruling it with an iron fist, but slowly opening up and becoming more benevolent as he falls in love with the former slave named Adriana Tomaz. Adriana ends up becoming similarly powered to Adam, and the two create their own Black Adam family, mirroring the Shazam family, who I get into more detail on in episode 26. The finale and much of the aftermath of 52 involves this story, so I won't say too much more on this one, except to mention that a 4-issue tie-in miniseries that came out during weeks 50 and 52 of this event was titled World War III. Another story that ends up tying in strongly to Black Adam's is that of Will Magnus, creator of the Metal Men, humanoid robots each made of a particular metal like tin, iron, lead, and platinum. Will has always walked the fine line of the mad scientist trope, but stayed on the side of the angels for the most part. However, soon after finding out that some of the world's most well-known scientists have been disappearing, Magnus himself is abducted and taken to Oolong Island, where he is forced to work on creating a plutonium man, while other scientists that were abducted, or rescued depending on their point of view, work on other superweapons funded by Intergang and the Chinese government. Some of the other characters on the island include T.O. Morrow, the creator of the Amazo robot, Dr. Death, and Chang Zhu, the giant evil egg-shaped creature on cybernetic legs. As you can probably tell, this story goes the most into the ridiculous, but it's grounded in a tale of dealing with mental illness that makes it relatable even as you get into the more fanciful elements. Meanwhile, with Superman out of the picture, Lex Luthor gets his time to shine in 52, as he creates the Everyman Project, giving superpowers to basically anyone who wants them, and is willing to pay, including to Natasha Irons, the niece of John Henry Irons, best known as Steel, one of the replacement Superman from the Death of Superman story. I talk more about him in episode 15. John is a surrogate father figure for Natasha, and her signing up for the Everyman Project, and later becoming part of the super team Luthor puts together called Infinity Inc., is an open act of rebellion against the Elder Irons. Family, both blood and chosen, is an important theme of this portion of the series. Finally, my favorite of the stories involves Booster Gold. For the unfamiliar, Booster is a character from the 25th century who has traveled to the 20th century with various bits of technology stolen from the museum he worked at as a janitor after a disgraced football career. He came to our time in order to become a rich and famous superhero. Booster was a member of the Justice League in the early post-crisis era and has always been played as something of a joke. In this storyline, things get much more serious for him, as he finds out that time has changed from the history stored in his robot friend's memory. Skeets, the name of the small flying robot who accompanied Booster, begins malfunctioning, and Booster seeks out fellow time traveler Rip Hunter for assistance. He finds Rip missing, but scrawled out notes on Rip's blackboard seems to point towards the changes in the timeline being Booster's fault. I love time travel stories, and this is one of the best told in comics ever. It's in this story that we also learn the true reason that the series is titled 52. If we had just followed the story of Booster, Skeets, Rip, and the other characters involved, I would recommend reading 52. With the combination of all the other wonderfully told stories also being involved, it's absolutely necessary reading for DC fans, which is why I dedicated this 52nd episode to it. Although it's been 14 years since 52 was originally released, and the DC Universe has been through a hard reboot, with another possibly coming up, 52 still holds up and is an important part of DC lore. Introducing characters like Batwoman and the new female Question, revamping and giving new motivations to heroes and villains alike, the repercussions of this story continue to resonate. And because of this record-breaking miniseries, it's tied with Batman Eternal, which came out a couple of years later, for the most issues of a weekly series, the number 52 itself has become associated with DC Comics, who named their reboot The New 52, and includes references to the number all over their publishing line and in the DC TV shows and movies as well. I hope this gets you excited to give the series a try, and perhaps it will spark other questions you may have. If so, feel free to ask them by sending me an email at welcometogeektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or you can go to welcome2, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click Submit a Question if you'd prefer to remain anonymous. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcometogeektown and Twitter @geektownpodcast. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, come join the Patreon at patreon.com/welcometogeektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show, so we can all tell them, "Welcome to Geektown, population, us." Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips are the copyrighted material of their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.